Well, it's great to be with you. Thank you for spending some time. We've been talking a lot, and obviously it's literally in your title, this legacy. And let's start with what I think a lot of this audience knows, and certainly I know from looking after the business of sport. The legacy of the World Cup is one of the most interesting stories around, especially at this moment, as back in North America, we think about the World Cup, and then obviously in 2034, it coming back to the region. If you had to distill down the single biggest lesson from hosting the World Cup, what would it be?
Well, to start off with, I think one of the biggest legacy elements of the World Cup is the fact that I'm still talking about the World Cup.
Yeah, right.
So I think that's the starting point. Thank you. No, I mean, distilling one single lesson. You're trying to distill 13 years of toil, but I would say knowing what we wanted. When we entered, whether the bidding stage or on the delivery stage, from day one, we knew exactly what we wanted out of this tournament. We knew that we wanted to retain a legacy. We wanted this event to be an accelerant, a catalyst for positive change, both in the country and within the region. We worked towards that goal. We realized the challenges that were ahead of us, and one of the most important legacies that we wanted to leave was the human capabilities in terms of delivering such an event, and we worked diligently towards that. So the simple lesson, I guess, is knowing what you want out of this event and out of this tournament. We knew from day one what we wanted, and we worked very, very hard towards delivering on it. Yeah.
It's interesting. I don't think I'm giving away any state secrets. You are often asked for your advice from host cities and host countries. What do you tell that beyond that lesson? What do you tell them in terms of there are North American cities who've never hosted something of this scale? Is there something that they have to do, either logistically or even philosophically, that comes to mind?
I think, well, to start off with, again, the first and foremost element is knowing what they want. I think, again, I keep telling any city or any country that's hosting this to be very, very clear about what they want and working towards that. That's the first aspect. The second aspect, operationally, if you were kind of to distill it down a little bit, on an operational level, communication. Communication is vital. Communication amongst the operating team. Communication, I think one of the levels of success that we showcased in the World Cup was the security level that was present in our World Cup and the success that came out of that. And again, a statistic that I always love saying, not a single English fan was arrested during our World Cup. Hasn't happened since, and so far it doesn't seem like it's happening, before or since. And one of the main reasons was the collaboration and coordination with the security officials, along with the operating team inside the stadium, transportation, and so on. There was a very clear communication plan. In the event anything changed or whatever circumstances got imposed on you, the ability to deal with that change, and again, communicate it on a lateral basis internally amongst the rest of the team, but also, very importantly, with the fans themselves. So fans would not be surprised, and to the extent that they were surprised, there was an open line of communication between us and the fans so that they're able to understand what is happening, what do they need to do, who do they need to go to address that. And I think that led to definitely a very seamless fan experience, and from our side, I'm very proud to say, a very seamless operation.
And so, and you alluded to this, you're still talking about it, but you're talking about it in part because of, and I'm using your own word, the catalytic effect it had on this country and on the region. I assume you hoped that would be the case.
Yes.
How does that manifest? What does that look like, and how does it influence you going forward?
You mean in terms of how did it impact the region?
Yes.
I mean, I think the event, and I say that again with a lot of humility, but I think the state and the region got together in hosting what I will say, until I see otherwise, probably the best sporting event as of today in history. Whether you're talking about, like I said, operationally, fan experience, the impact it's had in terms of bringing the world together.
Right.
If you look at the fact that you had, let's call them the global north with the global south. Initially, our view was this is an Arab World Cup, and the Arab world will be welcoming the rest of the world. But then it evolved and manifested itself in terms of the global south being very present over here, and the global north embracing that diverse culture, and it became a global carnival. Regardless of the fantastic tournament that happened and the football that happened, it was truly a celebration from beginning to end. And I think what that showcased is the fact that this region is not an afterthought or a nice to go and, dare I say it, be a cash grab. The fact is this region today is a significant player and can actually host major events, and not only just host them successfully, but rather add value to that event, elevate the quality of that event, elevate what's happening. And I think, I say it, maybe it's not a direct causation, but today you see, for example, Saudi and what's happening in Saudi. A lot of the major events that are happening over there. For example, in boxing. Boxing's been revolutionized to a large extent as a result of what's happening in Saudi, and the ability for Saudi to host some of these major events and so on, sporting events. Today, for example, Morocco will be hosting the next edition of the World Cup, and Saudi will be, it will come back. The World Cup will come back to the region for Saudi. And I think everybody today is not looking at these nations and saying, why are we going there? Or how did that decision come about? Or what is the tournament going to be there, with a lot of cynicism, which we faced for 13 years, but rather, what is next?
Right.
People are expecting that, what's going to come, any event that's being held in this region, they're expecting 1,001 kind of night experience.
Yeah.
And there's no doubt that the World Cup paved the way for that.
And so on the what is next front, the World Cup is sort of one of one when it comes to events, as you've said. So what are the other sports that are most interesting to you in this state and in this region that you feel you can sort of use that same sort of formula for?
Well, I mean, look, first and foremost, football will always be the number one tournament or number one sport over here. Right. I think it goes without saying. So we've got, for example, this year we're going to be hosting the Under-17 World Cup. We're also going to be hosting the Arab Cup, which we hosted in the lead up to the World Cup. And I think the Arab Cup, in the lead up to it, there might have been an unawareness of it. Then it just picked up, and it just became such a great event and literally galvanized the entire Arab world, not only within our part of the world, but rather the Arab diaspora as well. So that tournament, I think, in itself holds on to its own. But then there's other annual events that keep on coming. For example, you've got the Formula One. There's a lot of, for example, tennis continuously come. We've got the Intercontinental Cup. And there's a few other events as well that will be, I'm looking at, the heads of the tourism over here in front of me saying, am I going to be announcing something out of the way? But no, I mean, look, sports in the end, a lot of the other events that you might be hosting, which would be fantastic, a lot of cultural events, a lot of conferences, but ultimately sports is the one that galvanizes a lot of these. And I think, we've got, for example, paddle today, part of the paddle tour, which I think is a growing sport as well globally, both in terms of participation, but also viewership, and that's one of the events that we're hosting. Tennis, the MotoGP. I mean, it's a kaleidoscope of major events. But dare I say it, all of it's centered around major footballing events. Right. This is what's happening in our part of the world, or let's say in this state. Obviously, in the region, you can see what's happening right now. In boxing right now, Saudi Arabia is taking boxing by storm. I think esports is going to come very, very soon towards our part of the world. Saudi's hosting the Esports World Cup. There's a lot of discussions and exploration about other forms of esports as well. And, there's a certain major sporting event. I think the Olympics will always be on the horizon. Yeah. And people will always look at the other major sporting event that brings the world together in an unprecedented way. So the Olympics is definitely something I think that is on the horizon.
Talk to us about sports as sort of an economic development engine, because we were talking about this earlier with some of the team owners, Mark Atanasio, Ted Leonsis, Amanda Stavely, this notion of a sports ecosystem that lifts things beyond the fans obviously has a profound effect, as we see around Qatar as it relates to infrastructure. But even beyond that, the sort of economic sort of engine that it creates, how do you take that beyond sport into broader culture?
Well, again, it's how you approach it from the very beginning, right? If you look at it purely as a sporting event, and I think everybody's evolved from that. Sure. Most either nations or even most team owners have already evolved from that and looked at it as a catalyst. So whether you look at a stadium, how do I build real estate around it? How do I make the stadium usable 7 days a week, not just during the tournament and come back? And so, whether it's hotels, whether it's training centers, whether it's museums, whatever it may be that attracts footfall on it. On a nationwide basis, again, you want to look at what's the industry that this sporting event can create. When we looked at it, obviously we were at a time looking at upgrading our transportation infrastructure. And so we looked at this event and how can this event be applied in terms of, upgrading transportation infrastructure. Tourism for us, which is always the more immediate beneficiary of these major sporting events.
Sure.
So you look at tourism today, and how can this sporting event, function and work hand in hand with the tourism authorities to ensure that it's sustainable and becomes a platform that launches the tourism plan. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think that, Saad maybe mentioned it earlier, today we've been addressing I think we've overreached our numbers, right, if I'm not mistaken. 2025, we're talking about 5 million visitors. I think that was, in the original plan, might have been in 2027 or 2028. I'm not exactly sure about the timing, but we've definitely accelerated our tourism KPIs quite extensively. It's how do you utilize the entire resource of the nation and the state in terms of capturing all these economic benefits and economic goals. The infrastructure today has led, of course, to Qatar being a global hub for major events, but also a global hub in terms of economic activity as well.
Right. And so when you think about the continued ambition, the ambition leading up to the World Cup and the ambition coming after, what are the either historical analogs that you look at or sort of current, the peer group that you think about in terms of, okay, I want to be like that, whether it's a team or a league or a person, who are some of your North Stars?
Well, I'd like to start off by saying I think we are a North Star today.
Okay.
So let's just start off with that.
Quick flex,
North
Star.
I'm sorry, the little pride kicks in, so I apologize for that. I mean it with a lot of humility, really. But I'd like to think that we have, evolved into being a North Star. But I think just having a conversation generally about the sporting industry and generally about the value that gets extrapolated out of the sporting industry. We were talking about this earlier. I think one of the duo that I look and the teams that I look as having captured the essence of this is, for example, Wrexham, right, and Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney, right. What they've been able to do with Wrexham was create a narrative, create a personal connection to that club, and as a result of that, add value and create value, regardless of what was happening on the pitch, which was phenomenal, of course. Historically now reaching potentially the Premier League in a record time. It hasn't happened before, but apart from that, they were able to create a story out of this that people connected with, that the local, it revitalized Wrexham in a way that nobody imagined it. I was talking to Ryan a while ago, and what he was saying was, when him and Rob were walking down the street, people would come up and say, one lady actually said to him, we never thought anything good would happen to us. Thank you very much for what you've done. So the way it galvanized the society, so it had an impact on society. The team itself started, again, anybody who might have thought about investing before would have thought that was a ridiculous investment, high level of risk. Today people say, wow, look at the value that came out of it.
Right.
But they created stories out of it. It wasn't just a football team. It was stories out of it. That was a phenomenal, that was definitely something that you could, look at and emulate. And, I'd also be remiss at, not mentioning just one achievement as well for people that I have a lot of respect for. Amanda and Murdat, who are sitting in I can see them in the crowd. What was done with Newcastle as well is a phenomenal achievement as well.
Yeah.
In terms of the storyline, but more importantly, the work that was put in, to be able to achieve, and I think historically and emotionally have, again, everybody who supports Newcastle kind of just follow up in that. So I think the secret generally is the fact that I think whether it's sport, we live in an age today where it's an attention economy. I'm not the first person that said it, I'm not the last person that's going to say it, but we live in an attention economy. Whether it's football, whether it's basketball, whether it's golf, whether it's a conference, whether it's a TikTok star, everybody's fighting for attention, one way or the other. And I think when sport out of every other, let's say, asset class or every other event, has the strongest ability to create that spark of emotional connection with people. But the idea is then how do you create that value and maintain that value? And the examples that I've just said have been able to create that long-lasting relationship, that long-lasting investment into the team that continues giving and adds value and adds, more importantly, loyalty.
Right.
And so ultimately when I say to any event, anything that we're looking at, whether sporting or otherwise, ultimately there has to be that emotional connection that builds that brand loyalty or that team loyalty.
Well, and Ryan and Rob, to go back to what you were saying, talk a ton about storytelling, and you've mentioned that as well. When it comes to that, I know you have some ambition as well in the film business and the film industry, and sort of continuing to build on what is a long legacy here, but maybe a quieter legacy. How do you accelerate that, or how do you amplify it? I guess maybe a better word.
Well, I think to start off with just, again, just one little, I think storytelling is part of our tradition. I said this, I think, a couple of years ago when I was on stage. Storytelling is an ancient part of our culture and tradition in the entire Arab world. I think, if you look at film industry, specifically, for example, the Egyptian film industry and otherwise, some of the oldest film industries, as old as Hollywood, if not, some of them might be older. But I think, today, unfortunately, we don't have our stories or our content being, creating the blockbusters that other nations have been able to create. So I think that, for what we want to do is, one, create a collaborative effort amongst ourselves. So, I was just recently in Cannes, had great meetings with a number of different people working within the industry and some of the countries as well, neighboring countries, about looking at areas of collaboration and working together in terms of, becoming a gateway for international production, because that always gives the exposure towards improving our storytelling capabilities in a way that international audience consumes it, but at the same time also harnessing the talent of our people and harnessing the talent of the content creators of our region to be able to create those content, to create the content. But it's important to focus, like from the way we view it as well, when we're talking about the global market, it's not purely focused on, getting, for example, the Grammy or the Oscars and looking towards the West. But more importantly, there's markets also in the East. Indonesia is definitely a quiet market that's looking to wake up when it comes to content creation and content consumption. If you look at the East, there's significant markets that have already established themselves or are establishing themselves. And I think there's room for our content to travel there as well. So I think the idea for us is to, initially we're talking about the region as our part of the world, the MENA region, the Arab world. But I think it can very quickly evolve towards being a global South part where we create content for ourselves, to be consumed by ourselves, and then push for it to become, globally consumed or also move westwards.
And so what gets in your way? We're going to wrap up in just a minute, but what gets in your way of that ambition?
I've been very positive. Don't make me do that.
What do you worry about?
What do I worry about? I mean, look, I think I got to take a second to think about this. It always becomes a question of timing.
Yeah.
Right? I think everything that we do today becomes a question of timing. And making sure that you do it in the right way, you build it in the right way to ensure that there's legacy. But sometimes you need to capture the opportunity before you're fully ready. And that's where you need to create the balance. Are you, it's always the question that's in your mind. Am I really, jumping the gun right now and taking, because this opportunity is in front of me and it's the last opportunity, and am I grabbing it without being fully ready? And then all of a sudden, you don't deliver upon your promises? Or am I being too cautious and saying, I'm still not ready, and the opportunity then passes away?
Right.
And I think that's where you want to create the balance. To start off with, I think what we're viewing our approach when it comes to the creative industry is a collaborative approach, not a competitive approach. Obviously, there's always going to be a level of competition. That's the nature of things, but in a very collaborative way as well. But then the idea becomes, in doing that, are we moving in the right direction together at the right time? Or are we missing out on these opportunities? And then we have to rebuild from. So I think the question of timing and making sure that we're not overly cautious or overly ambitious.
Yeah.
Ultimately, though, it's one thing that I think, for me personally, but I know the state of Qatar always holds itself to, which is delivering on our promises. And I want to make sure that we do deliver on our promises. And every vision that we put together or we present is one that we work very diligently towards delivering on it and not failing the people that have put their faith in us.
Well, because is it fair to say that part of what you did learn, to take us all the way back to the beginning, from the World Cup was that ambition is your friend, and that maybe it is worth sort of extending a little bit?
Ambition is your friend.
Yeah.
Aim for the stars. Make sure your feet, though, are still touching the ground. So you're a bit more realistic while you're very, very audaciously ambitious. Being resilient, being resourceful, and being tenacious. I would say these are the factors, if you will, that you need to put in yourself to kind of move forward. I'm looking at the CEO, the new CEO of Badr Al-Mir, CEO of Qatar Airways. Please, if somebody can put the camera on him. And Saad as well. I think they're
nothing if not ambitious.
Well, by the way, no. But if there are two people that really represent this, by the way, I would definitely look towards them as two people that really represent these qualities that I put forward as well.
You're quite good at this. You're right on time. Thank you very much for your thoughts. Thank you for your attention. Great to spend some time with you, and good luck with your ambition. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.